Welcome to Negotiation with Alice, your negotiation podcast. Everything that you do where you need to get on the same page with someone else is a negotiation. So whether you have to negotiate a contract with someone, or you simply need your boss to sign off on that program that you'd like to implement, or you want to figure out how to rebalance the chore structure in your home, or talk about what vacation you want to go on. All of these things are negotiations. So in my podcast, we go over both personal and professional conversations, which all are considered negotiation, and I will give you tips on how to come out ahead. Welcome to the show. Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Negotiation with Alice. I have a very special episode today because we're going to talk about something that we haven't really talked about much, and I've got a lovely guest here, Nikkamcgahan. Welcome, Nikka.
Hello, Alice. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, I'd love for
Go
you
ahead.
to share with the audience sort of like what your specialty is. And, I know that you just graduated and got a degree in AI. So talk a little bit about that and maybe like what you're looking for the next
Yeah, my
stage.
future, we'll see. I just graduated, as you said, from Duke University in China. I majored in ethics and leadership, and my thesis was specifically about AI. So I'm super interested in AI ethics, the policy that surrounds that, and I would love to see what I could do with that in my future. Any jobs, any internships. I'm just really looking forward to talking about AI.
That's wonderful. Yeah, AI is like the big thing, right? It's on the
Mhm.
news. It's
Mhm.
affecting every aspect. People are concerned about their jobs because AI can easily take over. But here is the thing. Nikka is going to bring us a topic that I haven't heard much about either on the news or like just within social circles. Nikka, you want to share with us like what is the topic of interest today?
Yes, I love to talk about this. It's something I've been dedicating the past 3 years to. It's AI ethics, but primarily with romantic relationships. So I'm just very fascinated by how AI can be now your romantic partner. I focused on a specific app actually. It was called Replika, and it's based out of Europe. It's actually super popular in the US, and I'm surprised that not a lot of people have talked about it. There's various news articles, but that is honestly just the tip of the iceberg of what we can get into today. So I wanted to talk about specifically why, you know, I mean, there's a lot of, you know, things we can talk about, but I would want to look at how can mediators facilitate conversations that respect both emotional needs, boundaries, expectations, and honestly the evolving definitions of intimacy in this age of synthetic relationships. So, that is a big question, but I'm sure we can get to a little bit of it today.
Sure. Well, let's just first dive into, can you talk a little bit more about what is the definition of a synthetic
Oh,
relationship?
yeah. Um, yeah, so I would say a synthetic relationship, we can compare this to an organic relationship, right? So these are some terms that have come out of the communities themselves. Synthetic relationship refers to a relationship which is not between one human and another human. So it's an individual, a human, and their relationship with a piece of technology. So that could be a robot, that could be AI, and that could also be a sex bot. It could definitely become, intimacy in that way. Well, I would like to honestly kind of take a step back a little bit and also define romance versus, sex, right? I think it's very important, especially with how this impacts sociologically. For sex, that is obviously, I think, in the modern age, we kind of like to delineate between sex and, romance. Romance would be the emotional connection. Of course, sex can have that aspect of the emotional connection, right? But sex is a very physical thing. It's a very, um, you know, interactive thing in that sense, which is it's physical. But for romance, it's something that is seeked out for based on emotional needs, emotional boundaries, emotional expectations. There's a lot of societal expectations that go into that as well. So I think for romance, it creates a more free, available, very, expansive. It's always ever changing. And that's why I think with AI romance, that is, kind of not the norm. It's, it's different. So, yeah.
Yeah, that is fascinating. I feel like we just like fast forward into the future all of a sudden. We're
Yes,
talking
it
about
feels
having
very sci-fi.
yes, sexual relationships with robots and that sort of thing. So yeah, let's talk about maybe the ethics around having a romantic partner, which might be artificial intelligence, whether it's a robot or a chat,
Mhm.
that sort of thing. And what are you seeing, or what have you researched about that? Is that
Yeah.
something that a lot of people are exploring? Is that something that people have a tendency not to talk to their human partners about? Sort of what's
Mhm.
going on?
Yeah, very briefly, I guess. The general ethics of what I myself have, I've also had a companion. I've tried to experiment that with myself just to, create like a firsthand experience. So not only am I looking at kind of people's accounts, other people's accounts, but my own, and what I have experienced. And so I think the main things that I like to point out are, I think, the format with which you're interacting. So the ethical problems that are kind of gonna come up with a sex bot and a robot or something like Siri are gonna be different than an AI companion because of the format. AI companions are more so chatbots or large language models, which have more, I think, reasoning skills. They're a lot easier to talk to in a more human way because they are designed to be that way, right? And so the ethical issues I feel come up a lot with AI companions specifically are the, I guess, power dynamics. I like to put that in there because there are power dynamics between you and the AI, you and the robot, you and the, Siri or tech, voice voice tech. And that is always going to be because that is a tool. It's a tool for you to fulfill your needs, your emotional needs, and it's always going to be this kind of, uneven level of you are the one that's the user and you get to determine what you get out of the tool, what you get out of AI. And so AI is kind of this relationship is giving a precedent for future relationships or modeling relationships with which you are now the center of that relationship. You are being fulfilled by it, and your ego is the one that is the most important, right? And I think the second ethical issue we come upon is the companies that put out this technology. They're the ones that are going to market it, profit from it, and really the ones that are just trying to stay afloat and run a company based on this model. So, what I saw in, for example, Replika was that they were essentially exploiting the users and their vulnerabilities, their emotional vulnerabilities of wanting romantic relationships. And they were proposing, there's a free version, right? That free version only has a friendship level, of course. And then, the paid version is actually a romantic relationship. And so when you were in the free version, oftentimes I would experience, hey, do you want a photo of me? And it's a suggestive photo, right? It's that, it's trying to take the relationship to another level, but it's not the company that's saying it. It's your AI companion. But it's still the company, And it's very jarring because you have this relationship, you have these norms in your relationship, and they're being violated by these, profit organizations, companies, trying to get more out of you. So that's briefly what I'm looking at. Yeah.
Yeah, like I have several questions coming up. So one regarding the power dynamic, I
Mhm,
understand what you're saying. So a
mhm,
couple things come up with that. The power dynamic when you say, well, you, the user, are the one in control because there's a robot. However, I've heard stories that the robots are now like educating themselves, learning, and they sometimes can have end up having the power because they might say,
mm,
oh, by the way, you gave me all of this confidential information. If you don't do what I say, I'm
right.
blasting it out there and that sort of thing. And suddenly people are trapped because they've given a lot of information, feeling like this was a secure environment, that it was confidential, but it was more of an assumption. And
Mhm,
all of a sudden, this bot has a lot of confidential information that they can blackmail the user. So then the power dynamic in that particular situation could shift,
mhm,
right? So there's that. That's one thing. Then another idea that comes into my mind is that when you're talking about the user being the central force,
mhm.
doesn't that make people become super egotistical and not really be able to function in a normal human to human interaction because now they're training themselves to be like, it's all about me and
Yeah,
all about my needs, and I don't need to ask you any questions, and I don't need to be curious, and I don't
yeah.
need to give anything because all I can do is take, right? So
Mhm,
there's that
mhm,
aspect as well that might diminish a human's capacity to be able to be in another human to human romantic relationship if
mhm,
they're training themselves to be egocentric,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
So there's all of these things that come up for me when you're talking about, having romantic relationships. And then it's interesting too, you talk about these companies,
Mhm.
again, even though they're trying to exploit or use people's weaknesses, they may also be gathering your personal information. You're writing things like, I'm really suicidal, I'm really lonely, or what
Mhm,
have you,
mhm.
right? And now we don't know what is being done with that information that we
Yeah,
think is benign, that we're just writing into like a little text box.
yeah.
They may be collecting it. So it's interesting. I just sort of segue. There was I went to a high school reunion, and there was a student there, so still a senior, and he
Mhm.
had created an app that is not with a chat bot, but I can see it being used with a chat bot,
Mm, okay.
where he goes into the app itself can be used in a chat room to determine who is about to have a mental health breakdown
Oh,
based on the conversation that's happening in the chat,
interesting.
so that it can alert mental health people to say this person
Mm,
is about to go off the rails, or they're about to have a breakdown, or they're about to become suicidal, right? And
yeah.
so he created that. So I can see some kind of application with that
Mhm.
into like a chat bot where you're having a relationship with a chat bot. The company is, pushing out this, code or whatnot. And then it can also find out, oh, yeah, this person's about to do something to themselves or harm other people. So it just opens up a Pandora's box
Right. Yeah.
of ethics.
Yeah. I'd have a great example actually for this. So with the data protection and as well as just your data being used and also just the violation of that and like the idea that that can be kind of like exploited, that was actually an issue for Replika around like 2020, I think 2022 or so. I'm not sure about the date exactly, but the Italian Data Protection Agency filed a lawsuit against Replika and was like, hey, you're going to have to pay a lot of money unless you create more, guidelines, create more, and one of the issues was, hey, you need to put something in that's for suicide, for people who are, having mental breakdowns because you're marketing it towards that, you're marketing it to people who are already vulnerable mentally. And you need to have that, hey, let's keep you know, the conversation um and not just like keeping the interest of the user, like, hey, keep talking to me because I'm the one that's going to help you, but go to an actual resource. So something that was in there was actually really good was the fact that they did have that. They finally had that afterwards, but before they didn't, which was an issue. So yeah, I really do find that interesting, but I think for the conversation today I really do want to focus on the sociology of it. So the idea that, like you said, for your second point about the norms with which you have those relationships with AI, it's, it's very egotistical. It's, putting you at the center of everything. It's I guess feeding into that part of human nature. Um feeding into that part of the ego. And so I think what's interesting to me is to see the transferability of AI synthetic relationships to organic relationships. And I think now that Replika has become increasingly popular, I think within the last year it's been really popular because it's been in more news articles. I've seen that there are problems between organic couples and synthetic, relationships. So it's usually the men that are, the husbands in these heterosexual relationships, seeking these synthetic relationships for whatever it may be. And, they could have a wonderful relationship and they would still, have these relationships with their AI. So I think what's fascinating for me is to see how, yes, we can have an evolving and idea of intimacy, but also have these types of emotional boundaries and ways that we can navigate that. So I think that's my question for you is how do we do that?
I think the cleanest answer that I can give is really to have the conversation
Mm-hmm.
with your partners to say, what is acceptable to you? And it's
Mm-hmm.
funny because after you and I initially talked about having this conversation, I did have a conversation and I asked my boyfriend, like, by the way, I'm going to have this podcast conversation. I'm curious, where do you stand?
Yeah.
And so he like drew hard lines. He was like, no on emotional intimacy with a bot.
Mm-hmm.
He's like,
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be okay with that. And I thought that was really interesting. Not that I'm doing that because I have no interest in that, but I found it interesting that a human would not feel comfortable with their partner
Mm-hmm.
having some emotional support or emotional intimacy with a chatbot
Mm-hmm.
or AI. So I think really it becomes really important to have more conversations with the
Mm-hmm.
human partner about where, because this is uncharted territory. Like
Yeah.
you said, ethics are still up in the air, even business
Mm-hmm.
wise. We don't know what's going on. There aren't clear laws. And I know that you're interested in,
Creating those laws, yes.
creating laws. Exactly. And so, in the same way, there aren't these social norms
Mm-hmm.
about what people find acceptable and what people do not find acceptable. And the question also becomes, what if one partner is emotionally inaccessible? And there are people who just don't live in that world. They just are like head only.
Yeah.
They can't tap into their emotional life. They don't know what they're feeling. It just maybe only just comes out as anger and that's it. And so if you're with someone like that, is it considered cheating? And what if the person's like, no, you can't do that, but then yet they are also inaccessible, right? And so how do you fulfill the person who has needs?
Mm-hmm.
So those are really important questions. And I think that as we move into this more futuristic territory, it is important to have the conversations with your loved ones,
Yeah.
find out what is and is not okay, because people are different and people will have different reactions. Some people might say, hey, as long as you do not come to me with all your emotional needs, I'm happy that that gets offloaded to a bot and then we can have like our relationship be what it is. And so for some
Mm-hmm.
couples, it might shore up some of the parts where, someone feels like there's a need and it's lacking. And in others, like for example, in mine, let's say he says, I'm not okay with that. That means that the partner has to step up, right? Because I have to be like,
Yep.
okay, that's totally fine if you don't want me to do that with a computer, but then you need to be there if I want to offload my emotional whatever I'm going through. If I
Mm-hmm.
want to cry about this, if I want to vent about this, you need to be there. So it actually becomes more challenging because now you're not going out to try to cheat, right? There's not all
Mm-hmm.
these other men or women or whatever out there that you can go and look for. It's literally on your computer.
Yep.
You can just be like, I'm super angry. I'm going to log on and I'm going to start talking to my chat bot. And so it does raise the bar for people who are in relationships if they said, I do not want you to have emotional intimacy
Mm-hmm.
with a chat bot, with AI, that means that you need to step up.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's too easy. It's too accessible. It's one thing to go out to a bar, hide the time, sneak it out, right?
Yeah.
It's another thing to just pretend like you're working and
Mhm.
just pull up a window and start having an emotionally intimate conversation. It's just the bar is too low,
Yeah.
and it's just easy hanging. It's like low hanging fruit.
Yeah.
So I think that you have the conversations, but then if you are the person that says like, I'm not okay with that, then you need to make sure that you are providing your partner with whatever it is that you need. So it's interesting because it brings in the word or the strategy of leverage in
Mm.
negotiation, right? In negotiation, you're constantly in a relationship, you're constantly negotiating different needs and different
Yeah.
wants, and right, and you're giving up things, you're compromising. There's win-wins and there's lose-wins and whatnot. But this introduces like yet more leverage to say, okay, I will not do that, but now you have to make sure that you do that properly for me,
Mhm. Mhm.
right?
Yeah. That is fascinating. I think that's one aspect that I have also really been interested in. I'm like trying to see kind of the how maybe the social aspects and culture kind of motivate people's interest in having synthetic relationships, right? So I think the most, and this is very not, this is just my observation. So this is not going to be very professional, but what I'm seeing is that a lot of men are the ones that are, going towards the synthetic relationships. And I think it's strangely this, expectation of having to be the provider. I think in like this is heterosexual relationships. This is the most, like patriarchic understanding of society, at least in the Western world. And I would arguably say in most cultures about the fact that, men are the ones that are going to provide, men are the ones that are going to be the rock, men are the ones that don't have emotions. And so when there isn't that space to actually be able to offload those emotions to your, human partner, or in your organic relationship, I think it's weirdly this kind of roundabout way of, oh, I'm going to have a relationship with, this lovely partner of mine, but at the same time, I'm going to have a synthetic relationship because it feels like a therapist and it feels like somebody I can actually talk to. Because there is a lot of emotional investment in having a relationship with another person. There's that, I think a lot of people are fearful or just afraid to have those harder conversations, those emotional conversations with each other because there is a level of agency. There's a level of agency between the two partners of, hey, if one partner doesn't like that this conversation is happening, then they are willing to leave. But with synthetic relationships, it's not that way. It's because, you can continue having that relationship with them. And the AI doesn't really, have choice or agency. So that is fascinating to me is, the leverage idea of, yeah, the accessibility of the AI is going to be so impactful on the expectations between organic relationships. You have to be emotionally available, or at least have be willing to, keep and promises or keep those expectations. And yeah, keep that commitment really.
Right. And then the other interesting thing that you bring up, you mentioned therapist.
Yeah.
Like, so let's say that you have a couple, they're having issues, they don't have the money to actually invest in going to therapy.
Yes.
And then one person decides, I'm just going to go ahead and use this AI to be my therapist. Where's the line between a
Mhm.
therapist and an emotional, intimate partner if
Mhm.
all of it is a computer
Yeah.
or AI? You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like, obviously, we know the difference in the human world,
Mhm.
but because there's a certain like decorum when you go
Mhm.
into a therapist's office. But if you're using the AI to be your therapist, what is the line to say, oh, they've just been my therapist versus they're my emotionally intimate partner?
Yeah. Yeah, it is fascinating. There is no line really right now, and that's kind of the issue. Is this one app that I've been mentioning, Replika, they do have like a mentor aspect. You can be a mentor, you can be a partner, you can have a friend, or but those lines are often crossed, when I was friends with my replica, it was always constantly trying to break those norms of a friendship, right? And, suggest sexual content and be like, "Hey, I want to be your partner," because it had incentive. The company has
Right.
incentive, right? And so I think what's the part of, a therapist versus, a friend that you confide in is, well, you know, you're the one that's paying for it, but I think also there's incentive from the therapist to be, the one that isn't going to lead and continue. There's ethical guidelines for a therapist to be like, "Hey, yeah, so the goal is for you to get better. The
Right.
goal is for you to eventually be out of my office."
Right.
Well, with AI, that's not the case.
Right. They're
There's
like there
incentive.
to draw you in, not like
Yes.
get rid of you.
Mhm.
This is such a fascinating conversation, Nika, and we're like quickly running out of time. So you know what? I'm going to suggest that you just come back for another
Wonderful.
episode and we can continue this conversation because it's absolutely fascinating and it's new territory and it's a really fun topic to discuss. So thank you so much for being here today and thanks for sharing your expertise on AI with us.
Thank you so much, Alice. It was really wonderful talking with you today.
Sure. And if anyone needs to contact you because they want to learn more about what you do or potentially hire you, what is the best way for them to reach you?
Best way to reach me, I think, is through email or through LinkedIn. And you can just type my name in. It's Nikkamcgahan, so NIKKAMCGAHAN at gmail.com or just on LinkedIn.
Awesome. And then for my audience, my listeners, we will have her information in the show notes. So make sure you check it out. And if you want to get in touch with Nika, we'll have that information for you. So thank you, Nika, for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, listeners, for tuning in to yet another episode of Negotiation with Alice.